Are you looking to bust through some 6x6 paper pads? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. I have a pack of paper and stickers that I picked up at JoAnn's Fabrics and Crafts in the US. It is Everett Road by Kathy Holden. The company on the back, it says that it is jewelrymadeby.me.com. I think this is kind of a new to me brand that I saw there, but I like that these paper packs give you the opportunity to buy some seasonal paper without buying too much seasonal paper, because there are just 12 sheets. There are 6 designs. They are single-sided, but it is good quality thick paper. And then the Valentine sticker sheets, there are 12 sheets, so 6 of each design. This is one set of designs, there's 6 of that sheet, and then this is the other set of designs, also 6 of that sheet. And they do each include a happy Valentine's Day, a lot of general stickers, and some stickers where you can add your own sentiments. So I think that I will attempt to make some of these Valentine specific and some that maybe I could use outside of Valentine's Day, even though they're going to incorporate red and pink. In order to use up this entire paper pad, all 12 sheets of it, I have picked out 5 different paper busting templates for 6x6 paper and A2 cards. So I create these paper busting templates that show you how to cut a piece of pattern paper to make cards with no pattern paper scraps. Here, this is for 6x6 paper and then A2 cards, but I also have like 6x6 paper for 5x7 cards or 12x12 paper for A2 cards and slimline cards and all kinds of other things. But for instance, for paper busting template number 15, I picked this stripe paper that's pretty heavily Valentine in my opinion, and I decided that the 2 papers that I thought were most clearly Valentine, I would lean into the Valentines. I'm going to use a Valentine sentiment, but I'm also not going to mix them with my more solid patterns, which is my kind of go-to, is to take something that is a little bit busy like this and mix it with something a little bit more simple, like say this stripe. But today I'm going to lean into it. So I'm going to say, I really am going to focus on this beautiful but busy paper, and I'm going to use sketch 15. We're gonna cut our 6x6 piece of paper in half, and then we're going to cut 1/2 inch off the bottom. So I'm taking both sheets of 6x6 pattern paper and I'm cutting them to 3x6. Then I'm going to cut 1/2 inch off the bottom of that. So I'm cutting it to 5.5. And then I have planned ahead for this sketch. Let me move some of these others out of the way for a moment. But I noticed that I had in the coordinating sticker pack a Happy Valentine sticker that would pretty much cover this 1/2 inch piece here, which I thought was actually a good way of using up that bit of paper without really having to necessarily show off that bit of paper. Now, some people might not agree with that choice. They might say, well, you're just covering it right up, but I'm okay with that. So I'm going to try to center this sticker, and we will have to trim off the edges, or you can decide not to actually. I'm going to trim off the edges. And so I'm going to place it in the center as much as possible. You can do some more measurements if you like. And then you can see some of the banner is hanging off the edge of the paper. And in the final sketch, it would also hang off the edge. You can choose to keep that. But these are kind of thin sticker sheets, and so I think if I were to try to press that down, then it would leave a very obvious bump on the side here. And if I decided instead to just leave it, to not try to press it down, it is sticky, so it's going to get pressed down or get caught on things. So in this instance, what I'm personally going to choose to do is just cut these little bits off the sides, and I will repeat this process 3 more times. I did it 4 times already. And then I will have what I need to assemble these 4 cards. This sketch also calls for some cardstock mats around the edges. I notice here on the one that I have printed that it doesn't actually tell you the cardstock mat size for this small piece, but they actually are almost always a 1/4 inch bigger. An exception is that here on this back piece, it is 3 by 5.5, which is the full length of the card or height of the card. And so I only did a 1/4 inch bigger on the sides. And so what I'll probably do in this situation is I'm going to use craft card bases. So this stands out pretty well on the edges. However, I do want my sentiment to stand out a bit from this background and also not have to worry so much if I exactly line things up with the bits of the pattern paper that are sticking out. So I'm just going to make a mat for this sentiment strip piece. Let's look at the assembly for sketch number 15. This one was very simple, and I showed you how I created this Happy Valentine's Day sentiment already. So I cut the 1/2-inch strip that we needed off of that, and then going to be able to place down our background paper. I did cut a mat for that 3 by 1/2-inch strip, and I'll place it on the bottom half of the card. I did go with a pink on pink look for some of them, and then a craft cardstock for others, just because I was trying to use up some of my colored cardstock. I realized I have an excess in some colors. I want to address the other piece of very Valentine, or at least in my opinion, looking paper, and that is this one here with the hearts and flowers. I'm going to use 6x6 paper busting template number 22. And that again requires me to cut in half, but then I'm cutting on an angle here. And there's a pretty extensive note on the template that explains how you can cut these. But basically they're 3 inches wide, and then the longer side is 3.35 inches, which is a little bit tricky. However, once you measure it, I suggest making a template, which is what I did. And so this template is the size of paper that I always need, or that I always need for this particular template. And I just keep it with, I put my templates in a binder inside of like sheet protectors. And so I just slip that inside the sheet protector as well. And I always have that. So instead of ever making that measurement again, I cut 2 sheets to 3x6. Now I'll take this patterned paper template, and I can simply use that as my guide. I can, hold them together and then place that along the edge of my trimmer. Please always follow all manufacturer's safety instructions when using sharp tools. And then I am going to be able to have these 2 pieces that I can use on the card. Now, right now, these 2 are actually the same. I'm wondering if I just forgot that I need to use double-sided paper for this, because the points are supposed to be facing in opposite directions. And I think that works because of it being double-sided. But let's explore if there's a different way to do this. I think the answer is that I cut the second piece the opposite way. So I'm turning my template over. Sorry, sometimes it's like one of those things where I try to think about certain things ahead of time to make it easier, and other times I don't. So by putting the cut in the opposite direction, which it does show here on the template, I can do this with single-sided paper. With double-sided paper, I think you can just kind of turn it over, and that kind of helps you to avoid some of that. This also works with non-directional patterned paper, because the piece, one of the pieces will get turned, upside down essentially. So this is best for non-directional patterned paper, but it can work with single or double-sided paper. We're also going to want mats that are 1/4 inch about bigger for this sketch. And rather than consistently measuring them, because we have this diagonal going on, I suggest again to make yourself a template. So I took a piece of cardstock and I cut it to 3 1/4 inch wide, since the pattern paper would be 3 inches wide. And then I kind of just moved it down and eyeballed this edge, because rather than like knowing exactly a 1/4 inch, the math doesn't quite work out with the angles. And so instead I find it helpful to just kind of look visually and see that it's about 1/4 inch bigger. And I created this template, which I can now use over and over again every time I'm creating mats for this particular sketch. The next step is to create mats for these pieces of patterned paper. I did a similar thing where I created a template. So instead of starting at 3 inches wide, like the pattern paper, I started at 3 1/4 inches wide. It's a little bit tricky to measure exactly the number that you need for these, because with the diagonal, it just becomes a little, I don't know why, but I don't understand the math of it. I just can't go, okay, just a 1/4 inch bigger. So what I did is I cut it to 3 1/4. I placed my pattern paper down, And then I looked at what looked like, you know, about even on all sides, and I cut it to that amount. And then I just use this as a template. I did come up with some numbers, and you can try to estimate with those numbers and see if that works well. I did notice here that I actually made a note to my future self because I've had this problem before. It says cut 2, 1 mirrored. And that's because if I cut them all exactly like this. Now with cardstock, it doesn't really matter because I just turn it over. But with single-sided paper, it does matter. So I had made that mirrored note to myself. Assembling sketch 22. I already put the cardstock mats on them according to the directions. And as I lay these down, I do want to, because I'm using a thicker cardstock, put a little bit of support here on the side for that second piece. Otherwise, when I put tape there, it doesn't really have anything to stick to, and I'm just afraid that like it'll then start catching like hair and dust and all that kind of thing. I would rather the adhesive be actually fully down on the paper, or you can just not put any adhesive on that bit. You know, you can make sure the adhesive only is touching here, but I find that one of the reasons I like to kind of prop it up and add that little bit of cardstock there sometimes is just that when I adhere it down, there's going to be bits of it that aren't going to stick through the thick layers, and therefore they'll start popping up and can create a problem, especially too when you're mailing large amounts of cards, like for donating. So if you're mailing a single card, it probably won't come as much, but when you're mailing like a box of them, then as they're kind of flipping through them or sorting them or all that, they can start sticking to each other. I did pick the Happy Valentine's Day because I figured this paper was pretty clearly Valentine. I'd lean into it, doing the pink on pink, doing the Happy Valentine's Day sentiment, and I like how they chose to do the white and then give it the red background because I think that makes it really readable even on this busy paper, and I created 4 of those cards. So this paper pad came with 3 more, I would say, generic kind of patterns. There was this red with little tiny white dot paper. There was this pink gingham and this pink and red stripe. The last pattern that was like slightly, I mean, it's definitely Valentine, like there's hearts and flowers. At the same time, I think if I style it correctly, essentially, I can make it lean away from Valentine and just look like a pretty pink paper. So with that in mind, I decided to combine it with one of the other patterns to sort of tone down the clear Valentine theme of it. And I'm going to combine it with the stripe. So I have 6x6 paper busting template number 4, and it also is best for non-directional pattern paper. You can make it work with directional pattern paper. That's not how I'm going to be using it today. Both of my papers are non-directional. So I did just want to point that out. Like a lot of times, you wind up just kind of starting with that cut in half measurement. So we'll cut it to 3x6. I am cutting 2 pieces at one time, and I will cut both the same exact way. And we're just going to be swapping some of the pieces. So when I have a 3x6, the next step that I do is I'm going to cut 2 1.5 inch pieces off of that. So I am measuring from the end at 6 down to 4.5, then to 3. And I have my 2 1.5 inch pieces. And then the last piece that I need, so the last 2 pieces I need is a 2 inch and a 1 inch. So I'm going to bring it to the 2 inch mark, cut 1 inch off, and I'm left with that 2 inch piece that I need. I find it easier, especially on my trimmer, to make bigger measurements. So I don't want to be trying to cut, like bringing it down to the 1 inch mark, especially if I have a larger piece like that, because it kind of flops over and sometimes that creates an imprecise cut. But also then I'm putting my fingers closer to the blade. I always want to be safe. You should always be safe by making sure you understand how to use your tools. And so instead cutting it at that 2 inch mark is a little bit easier for me. We'll do the same thing with one set of the stripe paper. So 1.5 inches off, 1.5 inches off, 1 inch off, leaving me with the 2 inch piece. So that 3x2 inch piece will be the focal point image, or where you could put your focal point image in this sketch. It shows it in the sketch as the two 1.5-inch pieces at the top and the 1-inch piece in the center, all with 1/4-inch mats, and then that 3x2 turned on its side and placed here in the center. You can switch the whole thing to be a horizontal card, which I might do because I think my stickers might work better on the horizontal, but I'm not sure yet. It doesn't really change anything. It doesn't change the mats that I cut. It doesn't even really change the assembly until I put the sentiment on, because then I'm just going to turn it on its side. Everything else can remain the same because they are non-directional patterned paper, but each of these will get a, you know, I was going to say they'll each get a 1/4-inch bigger mat, but I might skip mats on this one. I think that the paper there in the center stands out from the background pretty well, and I might test that with the pink as the foreground, this light pink color. So if I were to place like two 1.5 inches, I could get a card base to help visualize this too, but usually I can get a good feel just even here on my work surface, or in this case, my paper trimmer. And again, you don't need a mat to help that stand out. If you like mats, please go for it. I almost always include mat measurements if it makes sense. I do have some templates that, like, for the math to work or whatever, I just am not recommending mats. All right, let's look at the assembly of paper busting template number 4. So I chose to use a non-directional pattern paper, and therefore I'm going to actually be able to switch the sketch. So rather than it being a portrait style card, we're going to make it a landscape style card. I had wanted to make some cards in Spanish for a box that I'm going to be donating to an organization that accepts and requests cards in Spanish. I have jokes on my website in Spanish, so even if you don't speak Spanish, wouldn't know what to write, you might find those helpful. And so I have this die from Sizzix that I'm going to be putting across the front of them, and I'm hoping that while it does have some Valentine colors going on, perhaps, especially if you don't see it in the month of February or this close to Valentine's Day, it won't look quite so Valentine-y. And I know when this video releases, it's basically here. So you might be wanting to look at those Valentine papers and think, what else can I do with them? So we have a simple card there. That sticker in the background to kind of bring attention to our sentiment was from the sticker pack, and I only had 6 of them, but I'm making 8 cards because there are 2 sheets of each makes 4, so 2 times 4 is 8, and so therefore I've used some of these rectangle stickers as well to just add a little bit of white space behind the die and bring a little bit of attention to the sentiment. And you can see there are 2 styles of the card, where the stripe paper is the focal point and where the flower paper is the focal point. And there are 8 cards in all of that design. So for this next card, I'm going to use the pink gingham, and I'm not going to be making a Valentine's card. I'm specifically going to make sure it's not. Part of the reason that I'm motivated not to make Valentine cards is because personally I only need so many Valentine cards. I don't, need tens of them. And beyond that, I do like to donate my cards. I have a list of places on my website where you can also donate handmade cards. However, they don't need necessarily a lot of holiday specific cards. Some organizations ask for more than others. You can check the organization. I always encourage you to check all the details. However, they could use more like everyday cards. You don't want cards that can only pass out the first 2 weeks of February. So I like to make these just be suitable for someone who enjoys pink, essentially, rather than specifically used at Valentine's Day. So I'm going to use 6x6 paper busting template number 36. This is a very simple one. This version of the template works with directional patterned paper. This version of the template, I do turn my pieces on the bottom onto their sides. However, if you had directional pattern paper, you can still make a modification to the template that allows you to use it with directional pattern paper, but you'll just keep them at their 3 inches wide. And so this will just look a little bit different here at the top and the bottom. It will be like that strip gets cut in half and it becomes long ways. Now, this one does ask you to cut this 3x2 in half again. The reason that I designed this is because I have seen pattern papers where they have these 3x4-inch pieces at the top that have like sayings or something on them. And so I wanted you to be able to use the sketch if you needed to keep that area blank, and then a version of the sketch if you were covering that area. So I'm going to start by cutting it to 3x6 inches as we have been throughout. It just happened to work out that way. Every once in a while it doesn't. And then I'm going to cut it down to 3x4. And if I'm doing one version of the sketch, it requires me to just place this on top. Now you can't even see that it's there anymore. So I am of course going to need a cardstock mat to go around it. The other option is to cut it in half, either lengthwise or widthwise. And then you can, if you cut it in half widthwise, you can put at the top and bottom as like a smaller, you know, it's like a less wide piece. Or if you cut it lengthwise, you can put at the top and the bottom with a little bit sticking out, and then it's even. So however you want to go ahead to do that. I think given my stickers and all that, I can go ahead with this design, and I will be placing it with a mat on both in the center of the card. If you are looking at a design like this, noticing a lot of white space, and I know I mention this often, but it's something where it comes up often because people will go, I don't like that much white space when they see a paper pad video, like maybe your sketches aren't for me or maybe certain ones. I have a video where I talk about how you could fill that white space. So if you don't want to, you know, there's like an inch or so around the whole card. In this case, I'm thinking something like embossing your card base could be a beautiful way to fill that space. So here's another one where even though it's Valentine's paper, I chose not to make a Valentine's themed card. So this one I still used a lot of pink and red, and I kind of wonder if I should have pulled in an additional color, because on the two other ones where I was leaning away from Valentine's, I did pull in some blues and blue greens and that kind of stuff. And this one I just left pink and red. But again, it's one of those things where I'm wondering, like, if it's not February, if you're not thinking about Valentine's Day, is it going to look as Valentine-y? You know, if that makes sense. I don't think that's a real word. But I did stamp a sentiment on one of the stickers from the collection, place that down, and since I was just making 4 of them, I had enough stickers to do them all the same. I ran out of craft card bases, and so one of them is on white, but I think that the craft always looks nice with, for whatever reason, I really like red in craft, so I do it a lot when I'm doing like Christmas colors or Valentine colors. But those are the 4 cards for sketch number, I realized I didn't show you the sketch number 36. Last, we have that paper that is red with tiny little white dots. We're going to use paper busting template number 42. This is another one that takes advantage of a diagonal cut, so I have created a cutting guide for myself, but there's specifically a note that explains it. So it says, after cutting the paper to 3x6 inches, again, then mark one of the 6-inch sides at 5 1/4 and the other at 3 1/2 from the top. Cut diagonally from one mark to the other. So one side comes down to 5 1/4. You place a little mark. You can do this on the back side of the paper. And on the other side, so 5 1/4, and the other side, you come down to at 3 1/2. You take a ruler, draw a line, or you can, you know, place it along your trimmer if you're feeling confident about that, and then you will be able to cut across it correctly. So if you notice in the sketch, when you go to cut those pieces, it shows them mirrored. This is so that you can arrange your sketch like, arrange your papers so that it appears like the final sketch. So I take these 2 top pieces and I switch them. Now, because of the nature of this design, one of them is going to go along the left side and the other one's going to be mirrored along the right side. If this was double-sided pattern paper, I could simply take these 2 and turn them the other way, and both of them would look like the sketch. However, because I have single-sided paper, I'm going to have one on the left side of the paper, or one on the left side of the card and one on the right side of the card to create this like sort of, looks kind of like a little mouth to me, but like this little triangle piece here. And so I just wanted to show you what the final result is and explain why not all my cards will look like the sketch, because this, in order to get them both to look like the sketch, you do this cut with double-sided paper. However, it absolutely works with single-sided paper. It's just that slight change there. Also with this sketch, because I'm using only one sheet of single-sided paper and there's not a difference between the two of them, you might notice that then the result is there's two patterns of the same layered right on top of each other, and it's kind of hard to distinguish them, but there's no call for mats on this. It's just because kind of again the way that the math works out on it, I liked it without mats, but if you want to make them kind of distinguish from each other, you could take a little bit of ink the edges, and that will make them more clear from each other. The other option would be to use one of them as the back paper. So using the white paper on the bottom of each of them. And then you could just leave it as white paper and be fine with that. And I think that that looks great. It's a clear place for a sentiment or something like that. It's going to be a very readable place to stamp, for instance. Or you could add some pattern to this by stamping on it, adding a little bit of ink to it, all kinds of ideas like that. And I've addressed that before. But I do just want to point out, in case anybody was like, I don't like that pattern on pattern look, those are some options for you. Sketch number 42, I'm going to again try to make a more general card, but I am using some of the Valentine supplies. I pulled in a blue card base. One of them did turn out white. Again, I just ran out of the blue color pre-made. And I picked this sticker that had a heart on it, but I mostly covered the heart with a sentiment. So it more looks like a floral design was my hope there. Unfortunately, the stamp did not stamp as well as I hoped, and so I did hand write the sentiment over where it was supposed to be stamped. It's not my favorite. I always feel a little... like I really like the professional look of stamps and the fonts and that kind of thing, even though I have at least very readable handwriting. And I added a little butterfly sticker as well from the collection. And then for the one where I stamped the sentiment in blue, it's one of those like background sentiments from Altenew. And I stamped it in pink for the one that wasn't going to use a blue background, so I wasn't just adding blue out of nowhere. But then here, when I did have the blue background, stamping the sentiment with that blue ink hopefully tied the blue into a second place on the card, and I made 4 of those. So I wound up with 24 cards from this pack. Only 8 of them are specifically Valentine's Day, but there were 12 sheets of paper. I've used the entire paper pad. I have not used all of the stickers. There were a lot of stickers. Honestly, it's hard for me to recommend the stickers unless you are making a lot of Valentine cards, but even still, if I put a sticker on most of these cards, and I didn't use very many, considering how generous and large the sticker sheet is. So I would say either intend to make more or get multiple paper packs or use it with other paper, but just kind of know that there's a lot more stickers than there is, or proportional to the paper, unless you're really using, you know, several stickers on each of your cards, or maybe you're just going to make a lot more cards with one piece of pattern paper. I only made 2 cards with a piece of pattern paper, but just, you know, to keep in mind and give you a little feedback about that. But overall, I'm really happy with how these turned out. I like I like the use of some other colored card bases to mix it up. Of course, I'm always making that choice, but it's really easy to just cut lots and lots of white card bases, but to mix it up and add a little bit of colored cardstock can be fun as well. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.